Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started with this next topic of the 5 Precepts, a householder's guide to daily practice. This is something that I just taught on Sunday, so I know many of you guys already have learned this just as recent as Sunday, but this is part of this particular course. So I'm going to walk you guys through this and helping you guys to learn. Feel free to ask questions just like you always do when we're going through this. I'm going to pause at different times to help you guys to understand it. Whenever you're learning something like this from the teachings of the Buddha, it's important to understand what he's teaching you is the natural law of Kamma. Sometimes when people study the 5 precepts, they've learned from other people that the Buddha taught no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, and no intoxicants. This isn't actually true. The Buddha doesn't teach that way. That sounds like rules. It sounds like commandments. It sounds like it's black and white. That's not what the Buddha actually taught. So I'm going to use the original words of the Buddha to be able to help you to understand what the Buddha taught on this important topic. But as I'm sharing this with you, it's important for you to understand that they're not rules and commandments. It's not the Buddha telling you what you should or shouldn't be doing. He's exposing you to the natural law of Kamma, helping you to understand this cause and effect, or this action and result. Because whenever you make decisions wisely, it's going to produce wholesome results. But when you make decisions unwisely, it's going to produce unwholesome results. And what he's really doing through these 5 precepts is he's helping you eliminate craving, anger, and ignorance, what we just talked about. Each one of these precepts is designed to help you eliminate certain aspects of these pollutions of the mind. So I'm going to be walking you guys through using the words of the Buddha, and I'll help you guys to see the cause and effect of what the Buddha is teaching you. And then I'll also help you to be able to see these pollutions of how a particular teaching is helping you to eliminate this particular pollution. So as we go, feel free to ask questions, just like always. So here, this is the words of the Buddha where he's teaching this particular precept. He says, abandoning the taking of life, refraining from taking life, without stick or sword, diligent, compassionate, trembling for the welfare of all living beings. So whenever you're studying the teachings of the Buddha, you're never believing anything, you're never accepting anything on face value, you're penetrating into the teachings to investigate and examine them. So when you see a teaching like this, one of the first things you should do is ask yourself, well, what is a living being? Don't assume that you know what a living being is, right? The Buddha actually gives you a definition of what a living being is, because what he's teaching you here is to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, because anytime you put out harm to other beings, this harm is going to come back to you. So he's helping you eliminate craving, this longing, yearning, this ill will, because you need to have a certain amount of ill will to be able to kill another being. And he's helping you to eliminate the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality, to be able to see this cause and effect, that when you kill other beings, this harm is going to come back to you. So he's not saying to preserve all life at all cost. He's helping you to understand to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So let's understand what a living being is. The Buddha gives a definition on this. It's called the 5 aggregates, or some people refer to it as the 5 elements or the 5 collections. You might think about it like the 5 criteria. These are the 5 criteria that make a living being a living being. A living being is going to have physical form, feelings, perceptions, something called volitional formations, and a consciousness. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through this so that you can understand it. In this teaching too, don't believe it, right? You can reflect on it based on your own individual being, because you know you are a living being and you can see you have all 5 of these things. So this definition is held up for 2,500 years, right? So every living being is going to have physical form, meaning the physical structures of the body. You know that you have that. Then they're going to have feelings, like pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. Then they're going to have perceptions. What a perception is your views and opinions about the world, the way you look out at the world. That may or may not even be true, but they're your perceptions, your views and opinions. Then volitional formations. These are your choices and decisions, that a living being is going to have free will. They're going to make their own choices and decisions. And then there's a consciousness, which is the mind itself. So form, feeling, perceptions, volitional formations, which are choices and decisions, and a consciousness or a mind. Every living being is going to have all 5 of those things. And then you can take this definition and not only apply it to you and a squirrel and a rabbit and all these other things, and you can see that these are living beings, and this is the way that you independently verify that it's true. But you can also take something that you know is not a living being and apply it to that as well to see if this definition holds up. So like this chair I'm sitting in, does it have physical form? Yes, it has physical form. Does it have feelings? No, it doesn't have feelings. Does it have perceptions? Does it have views and opinions about the world? No, it doesn't have those. Does it have volitional formations, choices and decisions? Can it choose to pick itself up, walk down the street and set itself back down? Can't do that. Does it have a consciousness or a mind? No. So you can see that this definition holds up for living beings and then non-living beings. You can see and clearly identify this is not a living being, right? So this is where you can come to understand that things like plants, bacteria, viruses, things like this, these aren't actual living beings. And one of the challenges is that we use language that oftentimes associates with it being a living being. So we might say, I'm going to take this antibiotic and kill this bacteria, or I'm going to kill this virus, but you're not actually killing the bacteria because it's not a living being, right? So as long as you have this lack of wisdom, you might speak and say things like that, which isn't actually true reality. So you need to be able to see what you're actually doing is eliminating that bacteria from the body, or you're eliminating that virus, or you're harvesting that tree, or you're harvesting that broccoli. So while we oftentimes think of plants as being alive, they don't have all 5 aggregates, so they're not actually alive. And it's nice to think about plants in a warm way, and we've learned over time that we need to take care of plants because they provide us the resources that we need, but they're not an actual living being. And this is why when we harvest them, we don't experience any unwholesome results. So you can see through the 5 aggregates that plants are not living beings and that bacteria and viruses are not living beings. But you can also see it through the natural law of Kamma, that if this bacteria or this virus is a living being and we killed it, we would experience unwholesome results because of that. But when we eliminate a bacteria from the body, we actually experience wholesome results because we're not killing a living being. We're eliminating this bacteria. And it's the same thing when we harvest a tree. We're not experiencing any unwholesome results in that situation. We're actually gaining a resource to be able to help us live our life. Now, one of the things that we learned over time is that if we're going to harvest one tree, we need to plant 5 or 10. Right? That was the problem we were having, is we weren't planting. We were harvesting without planting, right? So once we solve that problem, we're no longer just harvesting, we're harvesting and planting. Now we can see that there's wholesome results, that the forest grows and that we get oxygen and the resources that we need. So this is the 5 aggregates, and it's something that you normally learn later in your development, but I introduce it to you here because this is the natural laws. You need to learn the 5 aggregates. But when someone's first getting started, sometimes it's helpful to look at living beings through this. This isn't the natural laws, but it can kind of help you a little bit, where a living being is typically going to come from and originate from an egg, a sperm, and then there's going to be a consciousness. But this isn't always true. There's some living beings that don't originate from an egg and a sperm. They all have a consciousness because of the 5 aggregates, but they don't all originate from an egg and a sperm. So this can help you to at least get started, where it kind of takes care of a large majority of the living beings, but it's the 5 aggregates that's really going to help you to be able to see what is or isn't a living being. Because as long as you're causing harm to a living being, this harm is going to come back to you, and you're not interested in doing that. So the Buddha here is teaching you to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others, and that's what he's teaching you to do here. So you're going to need to ask yourself, and it's not my place to tell you what you should or shouldn't do, but you're going to need to ask yourself, if you're living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, would you euthanize a human or animal? Would you terminate a pregnancy? Would you commit suicide, assist others in suicide? Would you participate in capital punishment, war, government-sponsored killings, or any kind of murder? These are all intentional killings, but whether you choose to do these things or not, it's your choice. The natural law of Kamma is there going to affect you, in whatever way you choose to make your choice. My role isn't to tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing in any given situation. My role is to help you see the natural law of Kamma. And in some of these situations, some of these things can actually be used beneficially, and it could be potentially a wise decision. And there could be these same exact things could be used in an unwise way that's going to produce unwholesome results. It all depends on how you're making your decisions. So this isn't black and white. It's not a matter of me telling you what you should or shouldn't be doing. It's you coming to a decision that you feel is best in your given situation. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of these and help you see how in some situations there could be a potentially wise decision. In other situations, it could be unwise. And termination of a pregnancy is a great example of this, where if someone chooses to terminate a pregnancy, that's up to them. It's not up to me to decide for them. It's their choice to be able to make those kinds of decisions. Now, some people think about this as a political topic. I don't think of it that way. I think of it as a human topic because it's human beings that are choosing to make these decisions, and it's a medical technology that we have. And in some situations, it could be potentially helpful. In other situations, it could be harmful. It really just depends how someone's making the decision. But ultimately, the decision is up to that person to make. It's not up to me to make a decision for them. In fact, if people come to me and ask me certain decisions, I never make decisions for them. I just say, well, if you do it this way, here's what you'll experience. And if you do it this way, this is what you'll experience. But the decision's up to them to make. So let me show you how this particular topic, you could potentially terminate a pregnancy for a beneficial reason, and you could be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, but you could also terminate a pregnancy and there's no compassion there. So if I was a female, which clearly I'm not, I don't have a womb, but if I did and I had a fetus growing inside the womb and the doctor said, hey, this fetus inside your womb, it's never going to live a viable life outside the womb. It's never going to live a life. It's going to either die inside the womb or it's going to die outside the womb. It doesn't have what it needs to be able to survive. And this fetus is threatening your life. You could die at any moment because of this, right? In this situation, I might choose to terminate this pregnancy. And in this situation, I'm living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Because in order to have concern for the misfortune of others, it has to start with you. Right? This being who you are, you need to have compassion for this being. And if I was just to allow this fetus to continue to grow and it could kill this being at any moment, meanwhile, we know that this fetus is not going to ever live a viable life, that wouldn't be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings to threaten the life of this being who I am. So in this situation, it could potentially be wise for this person to choose to terminate their pregnancy. But now in another situation, let's just say I was having sex with lots of different people. I was getting pregnant regularly, maybe 4, 5, 6, 8 different times. I chose to terminate a pregnancy. And I'm using a termination of a pregnancy as birth control. And in this situation, I'm repeatedly killing a being out of my own decisions that I'm using this as birth control, rather than maybe using something else that would allow me to control birth without having to kill an actual being. And in this situation, if I'm actually having 4, 6, 8 different abortions, this is actually causing harm to my own body. And now each one of those medical procedures, I'm going to be experiencing more and more difficulties and struggles in this process. I can have difficulties with my own health as a result of this. So this is the Kamma coming back to me, that now because I'm killing repeatedly, now it's going to affect the health of this body, who I am. Where in this other situation, it's maybe like a once in a lifetime, twice in a lifetime kind of situation, where over here, it's not the case, that this is, I would be repeatedly killing here. So this is a situation where you can see that it's not black and white. You've got to decide for yourself what is best in any given situation. And I'm not here to tell anybody what they should or shouldn't do, but you can see the Kamma, that in one situation, there's a beneficial result. In another situation, there's an unbeneficial result, or a wholesome and unwholesome Kamma, or wholesome or unwholesome results. We can take other ones here, like war. Government could say, hey, go over there and kill those people in that other country, right? If you kill people here in this country, we're going to prosecute you for murder. But if you go over there and kill those people, we're not going to prosecute you for murder. So in this situation, you're following a human law, right? The human laws are imperfect, and they are not going to be administered and based on the same way as the natural law of Kamma. So even though the government could say, go over there and kill those people, you can't escape the natural law of Kamma. You're still going to experience the results of this. So maybe you're not going to be prosecuted for murder in your home country, but you're still experiencing the results of decisions of going off and killing other people. You could get injured. You could have medical challenges with your mind and mental challenges. You could get addicted to drugs and alcohol and substances. You could get killed yourself in that battle, in that war. And even if you come home, you could have difficulties reintegrating into society, where maybe you have trouble getting housing and a job and things like this. Sometimes people commit suicide in these situations. This is actually the results of the decisions of having gone off into war and fought and killed. Now this individual is really struggling in their day-to-day life. And this is the natural law of Kamma. They're not being punished. It's just the results of their decisions, this cause and effect. So we can't escape the natural law of Kamma. Our government can tell us a certain thing, but that's a human law. That's not the natural law. What you would like to do is elevate to this point where you're understanding and practicing this natural law. And if you do that, you'll never have a problem with your government ever, because you're practicing the natural law of Kamma. Then sometimes people ask me things about infestations of insects and things like this. They're like, hey, what should I do if I have termites that are infesting my home? Should I just let them eat my home? What should I do here if I'm living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings? Well, in that situation, what I would recommend someone to do is do some research to see if you can eradicate these termites without actually killing them. And we actually had this situation at our home, so we did this. And what we came back with is at this present time, there isn't a way to eradicate termites without killing them. So we needed to hire somebody to come and bring some food that they put down around our house. Those termites ate that food, took it back to their nest, and over a period of 2 years, it eradicated the termites from our home. Whereas if we allowed these termites to continue to eat our home, we wouldn't be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, because we need to live compassionately for this being and the other beings that live in that home, where we can't just go out and buy another home and just donate our house to a bunch of termites, right? We're not able to do that. We need to be able to have a shelter to be able to live for ourselves. So in this situation, we were living compassionately because we looked to see, is there a way to get rid of them without killing them? So the Buddha isn't teaching you to preserve all life at all cost. That's not what he's teaching you. He's teaching you to live compassionately so that you're making decisions through generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom instead of craving, anger, and ignorance. So these termites, if they were human beings and we ate wood, we would know to go out into the forest because we're not causing any harm there. We have a higher consciousness and we understand that we can go out into the forest and we can eat that wood and we're not going to cause any harm. But one of the challenges for the animals is that they don't have the same level of consciousness as a human being. So these termites don't understand the difference between eating our home and eating wood out in the forest. And they chose to eat our house. So this harm that the termites were causing, their Kamma is that the harm came to them. And this is one of the challenges of being in the animal world. So there's other examples here too that you guys could walk through these and think through them. But it's not going to be the same decision all the time. The Buddha's not giving you a decision tree that if this happens, do that. And if this happens, do that. Because that would be like a permanent answer for every situation. Instead, you need to move to a higher consciousness where you're thinking through all the variables that you're experiencing and then decide for yourself what would be best in any given situation. And when you're having challenges to do that, that's where you can reach out to a teacher like me, and I will help you to understand the natural law of Kamma. And then you make whatever decision that you think is best for yourself. Sometimes students ask me about things like DNR. This is called Do Not Resuscitate. I don't know if you guys know what this is. This is a legal document that you can put in place while you're alive with your living relatives. And basically what you say in this legal document is that if this body dies, don't use medical technology to bring it back to life. And someone says, hey, is this practicing this precept? And the answer is yes, because in this situation, you haven't actually killed anything. You haven't injured anything. What you're saying is, I'm comfortable with death. That's all you're saying here. So if you have a DNR, or you ever decide to have a DNR, you're still practicing this precept because you haven't actually intentionally killed any living being in this situation. You're just choosing to not use medical technology to come back to life. Then sometimes people ask me about defense and protection, that if you were at home at say like 3 a.m. in the morning and you're sleeping and somebody breaks into your house, like what should you do, right? Well, what I remind students is that if someone's breaking into your house at 3 a.m. in the morning, they're not bringing you chocolate and flowers, right? That's not what they're doing. They're there to cause some harm, right? So what you would like to do, if possible, is get out of the house, right? If they would like to break the stuff in your house, if they'd like to steal something, okay, just leave and call the police and let them come with their tools and their training and their techniques and deal with this situation. That's what the police are for. But remember, it's not about a decision tree. You can't make the same decision all the time. You might look out your bedroom window and you see a gang of people outside in your front yard. It's not wise to leave your house in that situation. So you're going to need to make a wise decision. So if this person has you backed up into the corner and they're trying to cause harm and inflict harm, it wouldn't be to live compassionately for all living beings to sit there and let them stab you with a knife and beat you up or rape you or shoot you with a gun. So if you need to cause harm in order to stop this harm coming to you, that's that person's Kamma, that person is coming there to do harm, and now harm is coming to them. You're not functioning through craving, anger, and ignorance. You didn't go out into the world looking to kill somebody. You're just dealing with the situation that's come into your home. So you can defend this body and the people around you without any issue whatsoever. You don't need to feel guilty or shameful or anything like that, even if this person ends up dying, right? What I would encourage you to do is cause the least amount of harm as possible in this situation, because that'll keep things taken care of. And then sometimes people ask me about consuming animal products, like going vegan and having a plant-based food supply. What you'll notice is if you choose to do this, you're going to experience more health in the body and more health in the mind. But whether you choose to do it or if or when, it's up to you. Eating animal flesh is going to impact the health of your body, because you're not just eating animal flesh, you're eating all the drugs and hormones and toxins that are in that as well. And they've done research on this. They've taken wild fish out of places like the USA and clean running rivers like salmon and stuff. It was actually in the state of Washington, and they tested the flesh, and they found cocaine and antidepressants and all these other things, because us humans have been flushing that stuff down the toilet, and it's polluted our water table. So when you're eating the flesh of an animal, you're not just eating the flesh. And even if you get farmed animals, oftentimes they have antibiotics and growth hormones and things like this, because they're trying to grow the meat as quick as possible so they can make the most profit. So you're going to need to look at these kinds of things and decide for yourself if this is something you would like to continue to do, because you're experiencing certain illness and sickness as a result. If you choose to move to a plant-based food supply, you're going to notice that the body is more light, the mind is more light, and you're going to notice that there's more health in the body and the mind as a result. And this is how you can independently verify the teachings. And you can go out there and look at the research and things like this. At one time, human beings were plant-based eaters. That's how we started out. That's why our teeth are the way that they are. If you look at cows and horses and things like this that are plant-based eaters, we have essentially the same exact teeth as them. But over time, we had to switch to meat because the plants weren't enough. When we were in the forest, we couldn't find enough plants, so we started being scavengers, and we started running away the animals like tigers and lions from their kill, and we started taking over their kill. And then that wasn't enough meat for us, so we started learning how to do organized hunting, and we started hunting and killing animals for ourselves. That wasn't enough meat for us, so we started moving to manufactured farming, and now we have a lot of manufactured farming in the world where there's millions of beings being killed every single day for food, where we could actually move to a plant-based food supply and we can maintain our health through a plant-based food supply. But whether or not you do that or not, it's a choice for you to make. We all experience the consequences of our decisions, and if you move to a plant-based food supply, you'll see more health in the body because of that. So do you guys have any questions on this particular precept? No questions? You have a question? Oh, yes, sir.
So I understand the thing about animals and all the byproducts that they've taken on, but isn't that also possible with plants due to the contamination of the water also to still get some of those byproducts also?
Yeah, so plants do have a certain amount of pollution nowadays. It's less than what an animal has, right? But in getting the groundwater from for plants, if it's raining, that's going to be rainwater's clean, right? And now it goes through the ground, it's filtered in the ground, and now it comes up through the roots. More of the challenge with plants is places that use pesticides, right? Because you're ingesting a certain amount of that. So eating plants the way that people are growing them now is not a perfect solution, right? If people got rid of pesticides, that would be a perfect solution, but it's unwise to hold on to an unwise decision like animals just because the perfect solution is not available. So usually what you do is you kind of increment your decisions more and more towards a wiser and wiser decision. So continuing to hold on to animal flesh would be a really unwise decision, in my opinion. And that's not to say that the perfect decision is already available, but there's a better decision that's available. And now more and more as people learn to get rid of these poisons and pesticides, we'll see more and more improvement in that area. But you will see a huge improvement just moving from meat to plants. But then, of course, there's a little bit of challenges with that. But over time, that will start to work itself out as well. Mm-hmm.
So it's safe to assume that Buddha was a vegan?
The text in the Pali Canon is a little bit unclear on this 100%. There's the Pali Canon, which we've been talking about, the 45 volumes of books, and then there's some collection of teachings in other places that are the Buddha's teachings, but they're not in the Pali Canon. So like I've seen there's a Chinese canon from China that has a collection of teachings from the Buddha, and the ones that I've seen are worded very similarly to the way that the Pali Canon is worded. And I've seen a teaching in there where the Buddha talked about how people would gossip and slander him and say that he actually ate meat when in reality he didn't. So we don't have conclusive evidence, but we can see from his teachings that he's teaching here to not kill, right? He also taught to not steal. If we take meat from a living being, this is stealing. He also taught, you saw yesterday in Right Livelihood, that it would be unwise to have business in meat, right? So if everybody practices teachings, there actually wouldn't be any meat available for anybody to eat, because one of his goals was for the whole world to experience enlightenment. So if everybody actually practiced right livelihood, there wouldn't be any meat available in the world. So we can kind of gather from the teachings that we have available to us that the Buddha most likely didn't eat meat, but some people will say that he did. Some people will say that he didn't. Here in Thailand, they have a big misunderstanding in this area. That's why you see a lot of meat being sold here. The Thai people think that it's whoever kills the animal is going to experience the unwholesome kamma, or the unwholesome results. But this isn't actually true. And you can see that through ingesting the meat, that it causes harm to the physical body. It's kind of like whoever steals the car is going to have the problem. But no, if you're driving the stolen car, you're going to have a problem as well. So it's the same kind of thing. So we don't know with 100% certainty, but when I look at his teachings, I know that he practiced what he taught. He's not going to teach one thing and then do something completely different. So here, if he's teaching to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, he taught to not steal. He taught household practitioners that it would be unwise to have business in meat. We can surmise and come to the conclusion that he didn't eat meat. And then, of course, with this discourse from the Chinese canon, that gives us insight into that too.
Is it required to be vegan to reach enlightenment?
It's not required, because it's about living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Because one of the things you might notice is that a large portion of the population could move to a plant-based food supply and be just fine. But because as human beings, we've relied on animal products for so long, there's going to be a certain portion of the population that even though they try to move to a plant-based food supply, their body just can't maintain life without, because their body is so dependent on it. So they might still eat 5% or 10% of animal products in order to sustain their life. And in this situation, that person isn't doing it because of sensual desire or craving. They're not doing it because of anger or ignorance. They're only purely doing it because they're living compassionately for the welfare of this living being. So that's what the Buddha is teaching you, is to get rid of craving, anger, and ignorance as part of your decision-making process. So I could easily see somebody maybe moving to a plant-based food supply for several years. They're doing that, maybe taking supplements and everything else, and their body maybe gets to a point where it can't, go on, where maybe they're having difficulties getting all the vitamins and minerals they need. Maybe they've consulted with doctors and nutritionists and people like this, and they're just like, hey, these supplements aren't working. You're going to need to eat some eggs or cheese or maybe even some fish or meat or something like this. And this person could have fully trained their mind to eradicate all the pollutions, and they're still choosing to eat a little bit of meat or some other animal products. And this person could experience enlightenment. So it's not about what you're choosing to do necessarily. It's about why you're choosing it and what's going on within your own mind. Are you basing your decisions in craving, anger, and ignorance? Or are you practicing the teachings in such a way that you are living compassionately? And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're vegan, but I suggest that each person try to move in that direction and try to get to that point where you are vegan. And if for some reason you've figured out that it's not possible, even with all the work that you've done, you might need to have a certain amount of animal products, and you could still experience enlightenment in that case.
There.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let me see if we have any other questions anywhere. Okay, I don't see any questions there. And let me check Facebook. Okay, I don't see any questions there. Okay, so let's go to the next one. This is the words of the Buddha again. He says, abandoning the taking of what is not given, living purely, accepting what is given, awaiting what is given, without stealing. So this one's pretty straightforward, right? He's teaching you to not steal, because if we steal from people, it's our own craving, our own anger, and our own ignorance. Because our craving is like, whoa, I really want that, but I don't want to work for it myself. I want to steal it from someone else. And now there's a certain amount of ill will towards this other being, because you're now causing harm to this other being. And then there's a certain amount of that unknowing of true reality or ignorance, because now with me causing harm to this individual, this harm is going to come back to me. So I can't cause somebody else to be discontent. You can't cause somebody else to be discontent, but you can cause them harm. So if I stole somebody's car, now they're not going to be able to go to work. They're not going to maybe be able to pick up their children at school or take their kids to school. They're not going to be able to go to the store and buy supplies. So I've caused this person harm now. And now this harm is going to come back to me. So it's wise to not steal. And then it's also wise to not assume something can be taken or used, right? If I was a college student in a class and I was about to turn in a term paper, and my professor has a stapler on their desk, and I just assumed I could use it and started stapling the paper, maybe they walk in and they're like, hey, what are you doing? That's my stapler, right? Maybe they're attached to their stapler. And now they get angry and they get frustrated, and they don't realize that it's their own mind that's causing that. They're attributing that to me, and now maybe they fail me on the paper, or they might even fail me in the entire class. And this was the results of my decisions, that I assumed something could be used or taken rather than ask, right? So it's better to just go ask somebody else. If your professor says, no, you can't use my stapler, okay, go somewhere else or go buy one or something like this. But in assuming something can be used or taken, you're going to find yourself in a difficult situation. But remember, this isn't about black and white, right? Like, you got to move to this higher consciousness. If I was outside working in the yard and my neighbor has a laceration on their arm and they're bleeding profusely out of their arm, and my other neighbor has a piece of fabric on their front porch and I could put a tourniquet on their arm, I'm not going to go knock on the door and be like waiting for them to come and then, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. No, I'm just going to grab that fabric, go over there, wrap up their arm, put a tourniquet on their arm. And then when they're off in the ambulance, I'm going to go knock on their door and say, hey, I'm so sorry. I used a fabric that was on your porch. Can I pay you for this? Or can I go buy one somewhere? Where did you get it from? I'll go get you another one. Right? You're going to make amends in the situation. So this isn't black and white. This is the Buddha helping you to be able to understand generally a way to practice, but then you got to move to this higher consciousness, take in the variables, and make any wise decision that you can make in any given situation. Same thing here with accepting what is given. The Buddha teaches you to accept what is given, because when people are practicing generosity with you, this is enhancing the quality of their mind. So if somebody's offering you something, the Buddha teaches you to accept it. And this is wise because it's helping to enhance the quality of their mind. So if grandma's going to give you that sweater at Christmas time and you know you're never going to wear it ever, the Buddha teaches you to accept it, right? But don't just put it in your closet and let it sit there and waste away. If you're not going to wear it, give it to somebody else and let them use it, right? Some people call this regifting, and they think it's a bad thing. But there's nothing harmful in that, because grandma practiced generosity and now you practice generosity. This is enhancing everyone's mind. And if grandma gets angry that you gave away the sweater, grandma's causing that. She had a craving. She had an expectation. She didn't practice pure generosity. So now maybe this sweater goes through 6, 8, 10 different hands. And now the last person is like, my goodness, this is the most beautiful sweater I've ever seen. I'm going to wear this every day of my life, right? They might really enjoy that. So now it's found somebody that could actually use it. But again, this isn't about black and white. If somebody offered you crystal methamphetamine or heroin, are you going to accept what is given? Probably not, right? So you got to move your mind to this higher consciousness, think through the variables, and decide for yourself what would be wise in any given situation. It's not black and white, right? And then the Buddha says, awaiting what is given. What this is not putting your expectations on other people when they're maybe going on a business trip or something like this. Like maybe you have a life partner and they're going somewhere and you're like, honey, get me this and get me this and get me that and get me this and get me that. And now they're going around town with this burden of trying to find you things. And now they come back and they're exhausted and they didn't even get you what you wanted. And now you're frustrated and angry, right? So the way to protect your mind and keep the relationship on the up and up is to not put expectations on people and just await what is given. Don't put all these expectations on people. Okay. So this is the second precept. Any questions here on this one?
Awaiting what is given kind of implies patience, or not like not like wanting something, but be patient and wait that it by itself comes to you according to Kamma, I guess.
It's eliminating your craving, right? If you have a longing, yearning for something, the Buddha is teaching you how to eliminate that craving. That's what his teachings are guiding you to do, is get rid of these pollutions. So yes, there needs to be patience there, but the underlying thing is to get rid of these 3 poisons and more deeply the 10 fetters. So if you put expectations on somebody that you want them to bring you something, that's coming from your craving, desire, attachment, and that's what you're working to get rid of. So by just awaiting what is given, it allows your mind to let go of any craving of wanting something.
So it's basically the same idea one have, just stripped of craving. So it's the same thing, the same picture in the mind of what it is just without craving, then morphs into awaiting to be given. Am I getting correct?
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay, so let's just put in a practical example, right?
Okay.
Let's say that one is desiring to be understood by mother, for example, right? And one example would be to crave for that and be and waiting for that and maybe pushing for it. And the other would be the same idea in the mind, but just letting it evolve by itself without craving. And I'm asking whether this type of growth around the same idea would then be awaiting what is given.
Yes, but this is more referring to material objects. But what your example is what you would like to be able to do.
It could be material, yeah. So I just made up. Yeah, it could be something like stripping the longing and yearning from that object.
Yep. Okay. That's what you would like to do, where you're not longing, yearning for it. You're not, oh my gosh, I just hope he brings me that chocolate when he goes to that town. Like that's the longing, yearning. And then when he brings it for you, you're happy. And when he doesn't bring it, then you're sad or frustrated. You'd like to get rid of that and just be like, hey, if you would like to bring me something, great. And if not, that's fine too. I don't want or expect anything.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now let's move to the next one. This is the third precept. So these are the words of the Buddha. He says, abandoning unchastity, abandoning sexual relations with women, men, who are protected by their mother, father, and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who are protected by teachings, who have a husband, wife, or partner, whose violation entails a penalty, or even with one who has been garlanded by a man, woman, or partner as a sign of engagement. So this is all about having sex and doing it in a way that isn't harmful, because you can cause harm through your sexual conduct, and any kind of harm that you cause is going to come back to you. So here where the Buddha is talking about abandoning sexual relations with people who are protected by their family, this is not having sex with minors, like 8-year-olds, 10 years old, people like this. If we did that, it's going to cause harm to this family, because this child is learning and growing and developing with their family. And now if we lure them away, this is going to be harmful in that situation to that child and that family. And in most places in the world, this is the actual human law too, that having sex with minors is illegal. But there are some places in the world that it's legal to have sex with minors. And if you look at that kind of place, you'll see that their economy, their society, their political system, all of these things are really in shambles. So this is the natural law of Kamma that's functioning, right? That the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that if we're going to grow responsible adults who are wise and able to maintain a society, that it's important not to have sex until later in life when our mind can make that decision. Because if you've had sex, you understand how impactful that is the first time, and we're not interested in doing that with someone who's a minor. So the Buddha is guiding you in that. Here where the Buddha is talking about whose violation entails a penalty, this is having sex without consent. Like if somebody was raped, or if you were forcing someone to have sex, there's some harm here. And this is where you can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can get all kinds of problems in this situation because of that. And then where the Buddha is talking here about abandoning unchastity, if you guys know what chastity is, this is like during ancient times, there were fathers who would put metal underwear on their daughters, and they would have lock and key, and it was only the father that could unlock these metal underwear. I can't imagine walking around with metal underwear, but there were people who were doing that, right? So that would be chastity. That's like having sex with no one, right? So unchastity would be just the opposite, where your mind's all the way on the other side, having sex with lots and lots and lots of different people. And if you're doing this, this is where you get sexually transmitted diseases. This is where you can get beat up and murdered. You can have your property destroyed. You can have your reputation diminished. This is because of going out and having sex with lots of different people. You would like to avoid those kinds of things. So the Buddha is teaching you to be able to do that. Some cultures, you might just end up being in a culture where you kind of meet somebody, you guys don't have enough money to buy a house, but you would like to have a sustaining relationship together. And you might go to your parents and say, hey, can we live here for a bit before we save up enough money and buy our own house? And if this kind of thing, the parents have accepted that relationship. And this isn't what the Buddha is talking about here, where he's talking about protected by their mother and father and so forth. In this situation, the parents have agreed that, yes, you guys can move in. And they're probably actually interested in seeing you maybe have grandchildren, right? If it's a opposite gender relationship, they probably are interested in seeing that occur. So in this situation, they've accepted the relationship. Up here, where the Buddha is talking about who are protected by teachings, this is someone who's decided to remain celibate. If someone's decided to remain celibate, they're making their way towards enlightenment, where you can actually get to the second stage of enlightenment and still be having sex. Sometimes people hang out there, particularly if you're younger. You might actually do all the work on the path to enlightenment, making your way up to that second stage of enlightenment. Your life's going to be quite peaceful in that second stage of enlightenment, and you might still be having sexual relationships. But at some point, if you decide you're going to move on from the second stage of enlightenment and get to actual enlightenment, you might decide to remain celibate, because that's how you get rid of sensual desire. Because as long as you have sexual craving, you're going to be experiencing sex in some situations and you're going to get pleasant feelings because of it. But in other situations, you're not going to be able to get sex and you're going to be agitated and frustrated and annoyed. You guys have probably experienced that before, where you were interested in sex, you couldn't get it, and now your mind was upset or angry or frustrated because you couldn't get sex. So when you eliminate sexual craving from the mind 100%, you won't experience that frustration and annoyance anymore. But when or if you're ever ready to do that, that's a choice for you to make. But the people who have chosen to do that, they're making their way to the third and the fourth stage of enlightenment. And if you were to try to lure that person away from that, it's causing harm to that person and to all the people around them. Because getting to enlightenment is the very best thing that could ever happen for somebody. And then the people that are around that person, it's helpful for them too, because that person can teach other people how to get to enlightenment. So what the Buddha teaches you is that if you're interested in having sex, have sex with someone who hasn't taken a vow of celibacy, where they're trying to get to enlightenment, because then that way you're having sex with someone who's decided that they're interested in having sex. Here in Thailand, they make this really easy for you, because people who wear orange robes and shave their hair, they're ordained practitioners and they shouldn't be having sex, and they're usually choosing to do that is not have sex. Also here in Thailand, people who wear all white, they're not having sex either. I don't have sex anymore, but that's not why I'm wearing all white. I don't need to advertise to people that I'm not having sex, because if somebody was interested in that, I wouldn't be interested in that. But you'll see here in Thailand that people who tend to wear all white every single day, they're choosing not to have sex. So this is a way to help you to be able to know who's interested in that kind of thing or not, right? So you'd like to interact with people who are interested in that kind of thing. Then sex with people who are already in committed relationships, or sex outside of any relationship you are committed to, that would be the unchastity that the Buddha is talking about. Or ensuring that you're not having sex with people who have a husband, wife, or partner, or someone who's in a relationship that has been engaged, right? So if you're luring someone away from their relationship, or if you're going out of your relationship to have sex, this is where people have been beat up and murdered and property destroyed and their reputations destroyed. This isn't something you're interested in. This is cause and effect, or action and result. This is the natural law of Kamma that you would like to understand and then make wise decisions accordingly. Have one partner at a time, and then when that relationship's over, move to another partner and have sex with that person, right? But if you have multiple partners at one time, this is where you can get into a lot of difficulties, not only with these things, but even sexually transmitted diseases too. This is how they come about, and that's the Kamma. If you were having sex with someone who's human trafficked, this is an individual who's usually being forced to have sex against their will, maybe for money or something like this. In this situation, they're practicing unchastity. You're practicing unchastity. You can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can get robbed in some of these environments, you can get sexually transmitted diseases. These are all potential things that can occur in those situations. And the same thing with paid sexual services, that if you're going into that kind of environment, again, you can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can get robbed, not only as a customer, but as a worker too, as a sex worker, if you were to do this kind of thing. You can get sexually transmitted diseases. Notice here that the Buddha doesn't say anything about same-gender relationships. And he does this intentionally because he was aware of same-gender relationships during his life, because he kind of talks about it in his teachings, but he doesn't teach anything about it. He just makes people aware that this is going on. Well, if you understand the natural law of Kamma, that it's when you're causing harm, harm will come back to you. You can ask yourself, if there's two loyal, loving, consenting adults choosing to have sex, are they harming anyone? they're not harming anyone, right? So if it's a male and a female, or a male and a male and a female and a female, they're not causing any harm. This is how wise the Buddha was 2,500 years ago, that he understood this. There's people today that don't understand this, but this is how wise the Buddha was, that he understood this. And if we understand the natural laws, then we understand that there's never been a time in history where every man had sex with a woman and every woman had sex with a man. It just won't happen because of the universal truth of impermanence. If every man and every woman had sex with the opposite gender, that would be permanence. But you guys have already learned the universal truth of impermanence, that things are constantly changing, that there's not a fixed state. So we can understand that there's never been a time where all humans had sex with the opposite gender, all the way back to the beginning of humanity. So we can understand same-gender relationships is completely normal, and it doesn't cause harm. But today, there's people who have craving in their mind. They want every man to have sex with a woman and every woman to have sex with a man. And when they don't get what they want, their anger arises. And then when their anger is arising, this is all coming from their ignorance, their unknowing of true reality, their lack of wisdom of the natural laws. So while those people are getting angry and have ill will, you're not actually causing that. So if you're someone who prefers same-gender relationships, it's completely normal. You're not causing any harm to anybody. Those people who are angry, they're causing their own anger. And then we can understand transgender individuals is completely normal too, because it would be impossible for every body to have a mind that identifies in the same way. If you understand that the body is one thing and the mind is completely different, the idea of these two things always matching up and identifying as exactly the same, this would be permanence. So if everybody that had male sexual organs, their mind also identified as male, this would be permanence. But we understand the universal truth of impermanence. So it's not possible for every mind to identify with the same gender as the body. And if you understand the cycle of rebirth, that we've all been different beings in the past, somebody could have been, as animals or other humans, could have been female, 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 and now that mind is ending up in a male body in this life, and now the mind identifies as a female, while the body has male sexual organs. This is completely normal if you understand the universal truth of impermanence and the cycle of rebirth. So if you or somebody you know is preferring same-gender relationships or is transgender, this is completely normal. There's nothing wrong here. It's completely explained by the teachings of the Buddha, and it's not part of this precept because you're not causing any harm through any of these activities. Sometimes people ask me about masturbation, and sometimes people think this is immoral and they shouldn't do this. It really depends on how you're using it. It can actually be helpful in some situations, but it could actually be harmful in other situations. So I'll explain to you guys how this is. So if somebody was listening to this talk and they were like, you know what? I've got 10 boyfriends or 10 girlfriends. And yeah, you know what? The Buddha's teachings are true. Like, I should only have one. This is really unwise of me. And maybe they scale this down to just one person, but maybe they have this really high sexual craving, and now they're going to use some masturbation to help them knock down that craving so that they can now just have this one partner. This is actually useful. This is beneficial. Or say somebody was interested in raping somebody, but they chose to masturbate instead. This is very helpful. This is not harming anyone whatsoever. So in this situation, their sensual desire is decreasing, and it's actually helping their mind. But in other situations, you could have someone who's maybe addicted to this, and now maybe they're meditating they're masturbating 10, 15, 20 times a day, and now they are increasing their sensual desire, right? In this situation, their mind is obsessed with this, and now they're going to experience harm because of that, because their mind's central desire is increasing. So this thing that I was sharing with you about using masturbation to decrease your sensual desire, if you know anything about like a dam, there's dams that are multi-million-dollar structures that as the water rises up on the dam, in order to protect the dam, they actually open it up and they let the water out. And this is the way to protect the dam. And then when the water comes out, then they close the dam again. So when the pressure is building up, they just release it, and then the water goes out, and then they close it up again. This is the same thing that you can be doing if you're working to diminish your sensual desire, or you're looking to even get away from sex 100%, if you're noticing the pressure is building up in your mind, maybe you've gone 1 week or 2 weeks without sex and you're noticing a lot of pressure, you could actually do some masturbation, release that pressure, and now maybe you can go 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks without having sex. And now you feel that pressure again, and then maybe you use a little bit of masturbation, and now it releases that pressure, and now maybe you go 2 months, 3 months, 6 months without having sex, and you can do this in a helpful and beneficial way. So this is how masturbation can actually be beneficial for you if you choose to use it to reduce your sensual desire or eliminate your sensual desire. But if it's increasing it, that's where it's actually causing harm to your own mind. Sex with animals is one of the few things that is actually black and white, that I imagine if someone did this, they would get injured, they could get diseases. An animal can't give us consent to have sex with it. So this is one of those things that's black and white. Sometimes people have challenges with pornography. This is like going into almost like a fantasy world. Sometimes masturbation is going along with that. If you are interested in intimacy, I would encourage people to go in that direction towards an actual real life partner, because going towards fantasies like in pornography, oftentimes your mind gets trapped into that and it's really hard to come out of it. And even when you do come out of it, those real life experiences with an actual partner oftentimes don't feel as fulfilling because you've been down in this fantasy world for so long. So if somebody is really interested in intimacy, I would encourage you to get rid of any kind of pornography and move towards an actual real life partner, because this is going to be much more satisfying and fulfilling for you. So any questions here on this particular precept? No? I used to get a lot of questions on this. Used to. All right. I don't see anything online either. Let me just check. Okay. All right. So now the fourth one. This was much more straightforward. Here's the words of the Buddha. Abandoning false speech, refraining from false speech, a true speaker, one to be relied on, trustworthy, dependable, not a deceiver of the world. We're getting much more illuminating language here. What some people say is no lying, right? The Buddha didn't teach that way. That sounds like rules and commandments. This is much more illuminating language. He's explaining to you why it's important to speak in a truthful way, so that people see you as trustworthy, dependable, reliable, someone that you can rely on. So if we were in a professional or personal relationships and we were lying, people would discover those lies. And now when people discover those lies, they're not going to be able to trust us. So when a professional project comes up or something like that, they're not going to be willing to staff us on that. And we experience the unwholesome results where we could have otherwise had a professional advancement. We're not actually going to experience that. Or even in our personal relationships. If you've done a lot of lying in certain situations, you probably saw that your mind was obsessively trying to figure out what you said to one person versus what you said to another person. And how could you ever get to peace and joy if your mind is obsessively trying to figure out what you said to one person versus another? So you'd like to always tell the truth in all situations. Then your mind can be at ease and you don't have to worry about what you said from one person to the other. The Buddha understood this so well that I included this other teaching here that you could see, where he didn't even tell a joke that had a lie in it, right? You might not see a Buddha as someone who tells jokes, but a Buddha tells jokes, right? You see him in these positions of meditating and looking so somber and serious. That's usually how people depict him. But an individual who's enlightened, an individual who is a Buddha, they're going to tell jokes. They're going to laugh. They're going to have a great time. They're going to be enjoying all the things around them, right? But when a Buddha jokes, they don't tell a lie, right? If you can imagine this individual being in a class like this where they're teaching and helping people learn all this truth, but then on the side, they're like telling lies, nobody would be able to trust this person. It's like, well, how can we trust that his teachings are accurate if over here he's lying and over here he's supposed to be telling the truth, right? So here the Buddha is actually teaching his son, Rahula, and he's explaining to him not to lie, even as a joke. And if you decide to implement this kind of thing in your practice, it's a bit more challenging to tell jokes that aren't lies, but those are actually usually more funny. because people have to work at them a little bit more. And then when you get used to having these kinds of jokes, you'll see that it becomes easier and easier. So if right now, if you're joking in ways that you're lying, or maybe you're diminishing or degrading other people when you're joking, it's better not to do that. Whether you're degrading yourself or you're degrading others or you're lying, it's better to tell positive jokes. And this will be something that you can learn, and you'll see that it's going to go much better for you in all your relationships. Any questions here on this one? Yes, sir.
The sentence itself, right? It says abandoning false speech and then refraining from false speech. Does it mean here that one is actually practicing false speech and the other is thinking about it? Or why why the original text have twice the same concept?
Abandoning is to let it go. Refraining is to like restrain your mind from it, right? To hold it back, like you're pulling a horse, the reins of a horse. So it's essentially
not
leading to
thinking.
the same thing, but it's just two different actions. It's abandoning, letting go, and the other one's refraining and like pulling back. Because the reason why someone lies is because of craving, desire, attachment. The mind is longing, yearning for something, and if you tell the truth, you're not going to get what you want. So you got to restrain the mind, and you need to abandon it, let it go.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. All right. The last one here. This one, the Buddha says, refraining from strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, the basis for heedlessness. Here, the Buddha is talking about putting substances into the body that produce heedlessness. So when you're investigating his teachings, if you don't know what the word heedless means, you need to go look it up, right? Because you're not interested in believing anything. Don't even assume that you know what this word means. So I went and looked it up, and this is what it means. Careless, thoughtless, inattentive, uncalm, unaware, or unmindful. So those of you guys that have learned the Eightfold Path, you understand one of the things you're cultivating in the mind is mindfulness or awareness of mind. Because having that awareness of mind, you can then eliminate unwholesome qualities and cultivate wholesome qualities. But how could you ever do that if your mind was heedless? Right? If you were unmindful or unaware, you wouldn't be able to make wise decisions. So everything on this path is all about making wise decisions. So the Buddha is teaching you that it would be unwise to put substances into the body that's going to promote this, because it would take you in the opposite direction of enlightenment. Right? And the way that the Buddha taught is he taught in a way that is timeless, because he couldn't imagine all the different substances that we would have created. Like he would have never imagined LSD. Right? Because that's like chemical based. They didn't even have that kind of thing going on during his life. So he just taught in this way that's timeless, because he knew things were going to change and that people were going to make different decisions about different substances in the future. So here we can look at some of these substances. This isn't an exhaustive list, but these are things that we can look at, and we can see in some cases it's not black and white. Like something like marijuana. We can see that this substance has medical benefits for sure. There's been research where there's been children that have 20 seizures a day, and they put a little drop of CBD oil on their tongue, and they don't have another seizure for like 6 months, right? So there's some medical benefits there, absolutely. But it can also be used for heedlessness too. It just depends on how someone's using it. So usually you would like to look for a high CBD, which is the part of the plant that has the medical benefits. But then there's the THC, which is the part that's for the high. And usually people who are going for the high will go for a high THC, right? And oftentimes people who are going for the high will smoke. But of course, there's other ways to ingest it as well. And the people who are going for medical benefits are usually going to ingest it as an oil or an edible or something like this, because it's not causing harm to the lungs. So you're going to need to decide for yourself, if you're choosing to use this, are you using it for medical benefits, or are you using it for heedlessness? And if you're using it to relieve your stress or anxiety or things like this isn't a medical benefit, because the stress and anxiety isn't going to be solved by marijuana, right? Because the stress and anxiety is being caused by the craving, desire, attachment. So you would need to eliminate the cravings, desires, attachments to be able to eliminate the stress and anxiety. The marijuana is just going to cover that up for a period of time, but then when there's no marijuana, it's going to experience the stress and anxiety. Then there's things like cigarettes. We know that this doesn't have any medical benefits whatsoever, because we've seen that. We've seen the research. We've seen how that works. And that's why we see less and less people in the world smoking. So if you're currently smoking cigarettes, you would like to gradually work towards eliminating this. The best way to do this, whether you're bringing in an wholesome quality or you're getting rid of something unwholesome, is you like to do it gradually, because then the mind won't almost notice it. So if I was smoking like 20 cigarettes a day, I would go to like 18 for like a week or two. Let the body and the mind adjust to this. Then I would probably go to like maybe 15 for like a week or two. Let the body and mind adjust to that. And then slowly get this down all the way to the point where it's like one day, 0 the next day, one day, 0 the next day, one day, maybe 2 or 3 days without a cigarette, right? And this is the way you can create real sustainable improvement in your life. So cigarettes are something that you would like to get rid of because it's producing unwholesome results for you. You're having to spend money. It's harming your health. It's affecting people around you with secondhand smoke and all these other things. You need to also look at prescription medications, because prescription medications are obviously very helpful in a lot of situations, but they can also be harmful if someone gets addicted to them. So when you're prescribed medication, what I suggest you do is research it to see whether or not it's addictive or not. And if it's something that's addictive, you might choose to ask your doctor if there's another option. And if there's another option, great, choose that other option. But sometimes they might tell you that there is no other option. So in that situation, you would like to try to get off that medication as soon as possible, use it for the period of time that you need it, and then try to get off of it as soon as possible so you don't get addicted to it. You're going to need to even pay attention to your caffeine intake. Caffeine is a stimulant. It's a drug. It takes your mind up into this excited state, but then you're going to end up crashing as well. In order to get to enlightenment, or I should say, when you get to enlightenment, you're going to see that your mind is experiencing consistent, ongoing energy all throughout your day. An enlightened being doesn't get tired. They don't get exhausted. They will get sleepy where they need to get some rest and take some sleep, but they don't get exhausted or tired. If you take caffeine where your mind goes up in the air because you're feeling groggy and you get up in the higher part of having that caffeine, you're never giving your mind the opportunity to build this natural energy so that it can be sustainable all day long. So if you get rid of your caffeine, you're going to notice that your mind has the ability to acquire this natural energy. And as you get rid of caffeine in your day-to-day life, you might notice withdrawal symptoms like shakes. You might notice dry mouth. You might notice headaches. This is a reminder for you that you're going through withdrawal. You're detoxing from a drug. Just like someone who's addicted to heroin or cocaine would go through withdrawal. If you get rid of caffeine, you're going to have some withdrawal symptoms, just like any other person who's addicted to a drug. It's just a lighter drug. That's all it is. And it's a legal one in most places. You're going to even need to pay attention to your sugar intake. We learned that as children, if we eat a lot of sugar, we go to the sugar high and then we crash. So you're going to need to pay attention to that. Some people will tell you that psychedelic substances are going to help you get to enlightenment. This isn't actually true. Psychedelic substances promote introspection, but that's only when you're taking the psychedelic substance. In order to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to be introspective all throughout your day so that you can look inward and kind of figure out the things that you need to figure out in order to make your way to enlightenment. Whereas if you can only be introspective when you have this substance, you're not going to actually be able to get to enlightenment because you can only do it when you have this substance. Your mind hasn't developed that ability. So if you're having a difficult day or you're having certain challenges in your day, you can't be like, hey, mom, hold on a second. Let me go drop this hit of acid. I'm going to be right back. And I'm going to have a question I'll have an answer for you, right? You're going to need to be able to look inward and figure out like, mom is saying this. Let me think about this. How do I feel about this? Let me respond to mom in a skillful way, right? So you're going to need to develop this introspection. The way that I think about psychedelic substances is it's kind of like you're walking down the street on the sidewalk and you're looking into the window and you see this beautiful product inside the store and you'd like to go in there and maybe touch that purse or that pair of shoes and maybe consider purchasing it, but you can't because you're chained down to the sidewalk outside. So it's kind of like that with psychedelic substances, that it promotes qualities in the mind that kind of mimic or kind of appear a little bit like the mind is starting to awaken, but you can't actually get to complete awakening because the mind's not developing those qualities on its own. It's only experiencing that through this psychedelic substance. So this is what I have to share on this precept. If you guys have any questions, this is everything on this particular topic. I'll answer all your questions.
So with prescription medications, I think you've talked about it before, but could they also be masking issues, not allowing you to work on them, such as cravings and desires, such as like ADHD medication?
Yeah, in some cases that's the case, because these mental challenges that people experience, the mental anguish and the symptoms are real, but the underlying cause isn't biological. Like something like ADHD, you can actually train your mind to get that concentration. The brain is not defective. It's just that the mind hasn't been trained to be focused. So a lot of times, students who are learning with me, particularly people from America or North America, they will be learning the teachings with me. They will be training their mind. Maybe a few months into it, they're like, hey, by the way, I'm on like 6 different medications, and I've been doing this for however many years. Now that I've been training with these teachings, I've been talking with my doctor, and I've gotten rid of 3 of my medications. Do you think it's possible for me to get rid of the others? And it's like, yeah, of course. That's what you can experience. I've had students with ADHD, bipolar, schizophrenia, even things like Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, all these different things, that they're on all these different medications. And then as they start training their mind and the body start performing more optimally, they can start shedding a lot of these medications, because they come with side effects. They come with a lot of expense as well. So that's a possible thing, that yes, the medications can mask what's going on in the mind, but then training your mind with these teachings, getting to more stability, you can start stripping away some of that medication. But I don't suggest people do that until they start training their mind and get more stability, and then they'll know for themselves when is the right time to do that kind of stuff. Okay, so it's 12:30, and today I'm going to be teaching walking meditation this afternoon. And normally we take an hour and a half lunch and we come back at 1:30. But walking meditation doesn't really take me long to teach it to you. It only takes me like 10, 15 minutes to teach it. And then we're going to actually do it. So we can take our full hour and a half lunch and get back at 2 o'clock. And then I'm going to teach you for like 10, 15 minutes, the walking meditation. Then we're going to do it. And we're going to still be finished by 3 today, just like always. So thank you guys for your questions. Thank you for your interest to learn. Enjoy your lunch. And if you'd like to come back at 2 o'clock, I'll teach you guys walking meditation. Okay, so be well. 2 o'clock. Yep, 2 o'clock.